Chapters 33 through 35 of Human Bondage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tom Weiss. Of Human Bondage by W. Somerset Maugham. Chapter 33. Philip could not get Miss Wilkinson's story out of his head. It was clear enough what she meant, even though she cut it short, and he was a little shocked. That sort of thing was all very well for married women. He had read enough French novels to know that in France it was indeed the rule, but Miss Wilkinson was English and unmarried. Her father was a clergyman. Then it struck him that the art student probably was neither the first nor the last of her lovers, and he gasped. He had never looked upon Miss Wilkinson like that. It seemed incredible that anyone should make love to her. In his ingenuousness, he doubted her story as little as he doubted what he read in books, and he was angry that such wonderful things never happened to him. It was humiliating that if Miss Wilkinson insisted upon his telling her of his adventure in Heidelberg, he would have nothing to tell. It was true that he had some power of invention, but he was not sure whether he could persuade her that he was steeped in vice. Women were full of intuition. He had read that, and she might easily discover that he was fibbing. He blushed scarlet as he thought of her laughing up her sleeve. Miss Wilkinson played the piano and sang in a rather tired voice, but her songs, Massenet, Benjamin Goddard, and Augusta Holmes, were new to Philip, and together they spent many hours at the piano. One day she wondered if he had a voice and insisted on trying it. She told him he had a pleasant baritone and offered to give him lessons. At first, with his usual bashfulness, he refused, but she insisted, and then every morning at a convenient time after breakfast she gave him an hour's lesson. She had a natural gift for teaching, and it was clear that she was an excellent governess. She had method and firmness. Though her French accent was so much a part of her that it remained, all the mellifluousness of her manner left her when she was engaged in teaching. She put up with no nonsense. Her voice became a little peremptory, and instinctively she suppressed inattention and corrected slovenliness. She knew what she was about, and put Philip to scales and exercises. When the lesson was over, she resumed without effort her seductive smiles. Her voice became again soft and winning, but Philip could not so easily put away the pupil as she the pedagogue, and this impression convicted with the feelings her stories had aroused in him. He looked at her more narrowly. He liked her much better in the evening than in the morning. In the morning she was rather lined, and the skin of her neck was just a little rough. He wished she would hide it, but the weather was very warm just then, and she wore blouses which were cut low. She was very fond of white. In the morning it did not suit her. At night she often looked very attractive. She put on a gown which was almost a dinner dress, and she wore a chain of garnets round her neck. The lace about her bosom and at her elbows gave her a pleasant softness, and the scent she wore — at Blackstable no one used anything but eau de Cologne, and that only on Sundays or when suffering from a sick headache — was troubling and exotic. She really looked very young then. Philip was much exercised over her age. He added 20 and 17 together, and could not bring them to a satisfactory total. He asked Aunt Louisa more than once why she thought Miss Wilkinson was 37. She didn't look more than 30, and everyone knew that foreigners aged more rapidly than Englishwomen. Miss Wilkinson had lived so long abroad that she might almost be called a foreigner. He personally wouldn't have thought her more than 26. "She's more than that," said Aunt Louisa. Philip did not believe in the accuracy of the Careys' statements. All they distinctly remembered was that Miss Wilkinson had not got her hair up the last time they saw her in Lincolnshire. Well, she might have been 12 then. It was so long ago, and the vicar was always so unreliable. They said it was 20 years ago, but people used round figures, and it was just as likely to be 18 years or 17. 17 and 12 were only 29, and hang it all, that wasn't old, was it? Cleopatra was 48 when Antony threw away the world for her sake. It was a fine summer. Day after day was hot and cloudless, but the heat was tempered by the neighborhood of the sea, and there was a pleasant exhilaration in the air, so that one was excited and not oppressed by the August sunshine. There was a pond in the garden in which a fountain played. Water lilies grew in it, and goldfish sunned themselves on the surface. Philip and Miss Wilkinson used to take rugs and cushions there after dinner and lie on the lawn in the shade of a tall hedge of roses. They talked and read all the afternoon. They smoked cigarettes, which the vicar did not allow in the house. He thought smoking a disgusting habit, and used frequently to say that it was disgraceful for anyone to grow a slave to a habit. He forgot that he was himself a slave to afternoon tea. One day Miss Wilkinson gave Philip La Vie de Bon. She had found it by accident when she was rummaging among the books in the vicar's study. It had been bought in a lot with something Mr. Carey wanted, and had remained undiscovered for 10 years. Philip began to read Murger's fascinating, ill-written, absurd masterpiece, and fell at once under its spell. His soul danced with joy at that picture of starvation which is so good-humoured, of squalor which is so picturesque, of sordid love which is so romantic, of bathos which is so moving. Rudolphi and Mimi, Musset and Chouinard. They wander through the grey streets of the Latin Quarter, finding refuge now in one attic, now in another, in their quaint costume of Louis Philippe, with their tears and their smiles, happy-go-lucky and reckless. Who can resist them? It is only when you return to the book with a sounder judgment that you find how gross their pleasures were, how vulgar their minds, and you feel the utter worthlessness, as artists and as human beings, of that gay procession. Philip was enraptured. "Don't you wish you were going to Paris instead of London?" asked Miss Wilkinson, smiling at his enthusiasm. "It's too late now, even if I did," he answered. During the fortnight he had been back from Germany there had been much discussion between himself and his uncle about his future. He had refused definitely to go to Oxford, and now that there was no chance of his getting scholarships, even Mr. Carey came to the conclusion that he could not afford it. His entire fortune had consisted of only £2,000, and though it had been invested in mortgages at 5 per cent, he had not been able to live on the interest. It was now a little reduced. It would be absurd to spend £200 a year, the least he could live on at a university, for 3 years at Oxford, which would lead him no nearer to earn his living. He was anxious to go straight to London. Mrs. Carey thought there were only 4 professions for a gentleman: the army, the navy, the law, and the church. She had added medicine because her brother-in-law practised it, but did not forget that in her young days no one ever considered the doctor a gentleman. The first 2 were out of the question, and Philip was firm in his refusal to be ordained. Only the law remained. The local doctor had suggested that many gentlemen now went in for engineering, but Mrs. Carey opposed the idea at once. "I shouldn't like Philip to go into trade," she said. "No, he must have a profession," answered the vicar. "Why not make him a doctor like his father?" "I should hate it," said Philip. Mrs. Carey was not sorry. The bar seemed out of the question, since he was not going to Oxford, for the Careys were under the impression that a degree was still necessary for success in that calling. And finally it was suggested that he should become articled to a solicitor. They wrote to the family lawyer, Albert Nixon, who was co-executor of the vicar of Blackstable for the late Henry Carey's estate, and asked him whether he would take Philip. In a day or 2 the answer came back that he had not a vacancy, and was very much opposed to the whole scheme. The profession was greatly overcrowded, and without capital or connections a man had small chance of becoming more than a managing clerk. He suggested, however, that Philip should become a chartered accountant. Neither the vicar nor his wife knew in the least what this was, and Philip had never heard of anyone being a chartered accountant. But another letter from the solicitor explained that the growth of modern businesses and the increase of companies had led to the formation of many firms of accountants to examine the books and put into the financial affairs of their clients an order which old-fashioned methods had lacked. Some years before a royal charter had been obtained, and the profession was becoming every year more respectable, lucrative, and important. The chartered accountants whom Albert Nixon had employed for 30 years happened to have a vacancy for an articled pupil, and would take Philip for a fee of £300. Half of this would be returned during the 5 years the articles lasted in the form of salary. The prospect was not exciting, but Philip felt that he must decide on something, and the thought of living in London overbalanced the slight shrinking he felt. The vicar of Blackstable wrote to ask Mr. Nixon whether it was a profession suited to a gentleman, and Mr. Nixon replied that since the charter, men were going into it who had been to public schools and a university. Moreover, if Philip disliked the work and after a year wished to leave, Herbert Carter, for that was the accountant's name, would return half the money paid for the articles. This settled it, and it was arranged that Philip should start work on the 15th of September. "I have a full month before me," said Philip. "And then you go to freedom and I to bondage," returned Miss Wilkinson. Her holidays were to last 6 weeks, and she would be leaving Blackstable only a day or two before Philip. "I wonder if we shall ever meet again," she said. "I don't know why not." "Oh, don't speak in that practical way. I never knew anyone so unsentimental." Philip reddened. He was afraid that Miss Wilkinson would think him a milksop. After all, she was a young woman, sometimes quite pretty, and he was getting on for 20. It was absurd that they should talk of nothing but art and literature. He ought to make love to her. They had talked a good deal of love. There was the art student in the Rue Breda, and then there was the painter in whose family she had lived so long in Paris. He had asked her to sit for him, and had started to make love to her so violently that she was forced to invent excuses not to sit to him again. It was clear enough that Miss Wilkinson was used to attentions of that sort. She looked very nice now in a large straw hat. It was hot that afternoon, the hottest day they had had, and beads of sweat stood in a line on her upper lip. He called to mind Fräulein Cacilie and Herr Sung. He had never thought of Cacilie in an amorous way. She was exceedingly plain. But now, looking back, the affair seemed very romantic. He had a chance of romance too. Miss Wilkinson was practically French, and that added zest to a possible adventure. When he thought of it at night in bed, or when he sat by himself in the garden reading a book, he was thrilled by it. But when he saw Miss Wilkinson, it seemed less picturesque. At all events, after what she had told him, she would not be surprised if he made love to her. He had a feeling that she must think it odd of him to make no sign. Perhaps it was only his fancy, but once or twice in the last day or two he had imagined that there was a suspicion of contempt in her eyes. "A penny for your thoughts," said Miss Wilkinson, looking at him with a smile. "I'm not going to tell you," he answered. He was thinking that he ought to kiss her there and then. He wondered if she expected him to do it. But after all, he didn't see how he could without any preliminary business at all. She would just think him mad, or she might slap his face, and perhaps she would complain to his uncle. He wondered how Herr Sung had started with Fräulein Cacilie. It would be beastly if she told his uncle. He knew what his uncle was. He would tell the doctor and Josiah Graves, and he would look a perfect fool. Aunt Louisa kept on saying that Miss Wilkinson was 37 if she was a day. He shuddered at the thought of the ridicule he would be exposed to. They would say she was old enough to be his mother. "Twopence for your thoughts," smiled Miss Wilkinson. "I was thinking about you," he answered boldly. That, at all events, committed him to nothing. "What were you thinking?" "Ah, now you want to know too much." "Naughty boy," said Miss Wilkinson. There it was again. Whenever he had succeeded in working himself up, she said something which reminded him of the governess. She called him playfully a naughty boy when he did not sing his exercises to her satisfaction. This time he grew quite sulky. "I wish you wouldn't treat me as if I were a child." "Are you cross?" "Very." "I didn't mean to." She put out her hand and he took it. Once or twice lately when they shook hands at night, he had fancied she slightly pressed his hand. But this time there was no doubt about it. He did not quite know what he ought to say next. Here at last was his chance of an adventure, and he would be a fool not to take it. But it was a little ordinary, and he had expected more glamour. He had read many descriptions of love, and he felt in himself none of that uprush of emotion which novelists described. He was not carried off his feet in wave upon wave of passion. Nor was Miss Wilkinson the ideal. He had often pictured to himself the great violet eyes and the alabaster skin of some lovely girl, and he had thought of himself burying his face in the rippling masses of her auburn hair. He could not imagine himself burying his face in Miss Wilkinson's hair. It always struck him as a little sticky. All the same, it would be very satisfactory to have an intrigue, and he thrilled with the legitimate pride he would enjoy in his conquest. He owed it to himself to seduce her. He made up his mind to kiss Miss Wilkinson, not then, but in the evening. It would be easier in the dark, and after he had kissed her the rest would follow. He would kiss her that very evening. He swore an oath to that effect. He laid his plans. After supper he suggested they should take a stroll in the garden. Miss Wilkinson accepted, and they sauntered side by side. Philip was very nervous. He did not know why, but the conversation would not lead in the right direction. He had decided that the first thing to do was to put his arm round her waist, but he could not suddenly put his arm round her waist when she was talking of the regatta which was to be held next week. He led her artfully into the darkest parts of the garden, but having arrived there, his courage failed him. They sat on a bench, and he had really made up his mind that here was his opportunity, when Miss Wilkinson said she was sure there were earwigs, and insisted on moving. They walked round the garden once more, and Philip promised himself he would take the plunge before they arrived at that bench again. But as they passed the house, they saw Mrs. Carey standing at the door. "Hadn't you young people better come in? I'm sure the night air isn't good for you." "Perhaps we had better go in," said Philip. "I don't want you to catch cold." He said it with a sigh of relief. He could attempt nothing more that night. But afterwards, when he was alone in his room, he was furious with himself. He had been a perfect fool. He was certain that Miss Wilkinson expected him to kiss her, otherwise she wouldn't have come into the garden. She was always saying that only Frenchmen knew how to treat women. Philip had read French novels. If he had been a Frenchman, he would have seized her in his arms and told her passionately that he adored her. He would have kissed her lips on her nuque. He did not know why Frenchmen always kissed ladies on the nuque. He did not himself see anything so very attractive in the nape of the neck. Of course, it was much easier for a Frenchman to do these things. The language was such an aid. Philip could never help feeling that to say passionate things in English sounded a little absurd. He wished now that he had never undertaken the siege of Miss Wilkinson's virtue. The first fortnight had been so jolly, and now he was wretched. But he was determined not to give in. He would never respect himself again if he did, and he made up his mind irrevocably that the next night he would kiss her without fail. Next day, when he got up, he saw it was raining, and his first thought was that they would not be able to go into the garden that evening. He was in high spirits at breakfast. Miss Wilkinson sent Mary Ann in to say that she had a headache and would remain in bed. She did not come down till tea time, when she appeared in a becoming wrapper and a pale face. But she was quite recovered by supper, and the meal was very cheerful. After prayers she said she would go straight to bed, and she kissed Mrs. Carey. Then she turned to Philip. "Good gracious," she cried. "I was just going to kiss you too." "Why don't you?" he said. She laughed and held out her hand. She distinctly pressed his. The following day there was not a cloud in the sky, and the garden was sweet and fresh after the rain. Philip went down to the beach to bathe, and when he came home ate a magnificent dinner. They were having a tennis party at the vicarage in the afternoon, and Miss Wilkinson put on her best dress. She certainly knew how to wear clothes, and Philip could not help noticing how elegant she looked beside the curate's wife and the doctor's married daughter. There were 2 roses in her waistband. She sat in a garden chair by the side of the lawn, holding a red parasol over herself, and the light on her face was very becoming. Philip was fond of tennis. He served well, and as he ran clumsily played close to the net. Notwithstanding his club foot, he was quick, and it was difficult to get a ball past him. He was pleased because he won all his sets. At tea he lay down at Miss Wilkinson's feet, hot and panting. "Flannel suits you," she said. "You look very nice this afternoon." He blushed with delight. "I can honestly return the compliment. You look perfectly ravishing." She smiled and gave him a long look with her black eyes. After supper he insisted that she should come out. "Haven't you had enough exercise for one day?" "It'll be lovely in the garden tonight. The stars are all out." He was in high spirits. "Do you know, Mrs. Carey has been scolding me on your account?" said Miss Wilkinson when they were sauntering through the kitchen garden. "She says I mustn't flirt with you." "Have you been flirting with me? I hadn't noticed it." "She was only joking." "It was very unkind of you to refuse to kiss me last night." "If you saw the look your uncle gave me when I said what I did." "Was that all that prevented you?" "I prefer to kiss people without witnesses." "There are no witnesses now." Philip put his arm round her waist and kissed her lips. She only laughed a little and made no attempt to withdraw. It had come quite naturally. Philip was very proud of himself. He said he would, and he had. It was the easiest thing in the world. He wished he had done it before. He did it again. "Oh, you mustn't," she said. "Why not?" "Because I like it." She laughed. End of chapter 33. Chapter 34. Next day, after dinner, they took their rugs and cushions to the fountain and their books, but they did not read. Miss Wilkinson made herself comfortable, and she opened the red sunshade. Philip was not at all shy now, but at first she would not let him kiss her. "It was very wrong of me last night," she said. "I couldn't sleep. I felt I'd done so wrong." "What nonsense!" he cried. "I'm sure you slept like a top." "What do you think your uncle would say if he knew?" "There's no reason why he should know." He leaned over her, and his heart went pit-a-pat. "Why do you want to kiss me?" He knew he ought to reply, "Because I love you," but he could not bring himself to say it. "Why do you think?" he asked instead. She looked at him with smiling eyes and touched his face with the tips of her fingers. "How smooth your face is," she murmured. "I want shaving awfully," he said. It was astonishing how difficult he found it to make romantic speeches. He found that silence helped him much more than words. He could look inexpressible things. Miss Wilkinson sighed. "Do you like me at all?" "Yes, awfully." And when he tried to kiss her again, she did not resist. He pretended to be much more passionate than he really was, and he succeeded in playing a part which looked very well in his own eyes. "I'm beginning to be rather frightened of you," said Miss Wilkinson. "You'll come out after supper, won't you?" he begged. "Not unless you promise to behave yourself." "I'll promise anything." He was catching fire from the flame he was partly simulating, and at tea time he was obstreperously merry. Miss Wilkinson looked at him nervously. "You mustn't have those shining eyes," she said to him afterwards. "What will your Aunt Louisa think?" "I don't care what she thinks." Miss Wilkinson gave a little laugh of pleasure. They had no sooner finished supper than he said to her, "Are you going to keep me company while I smoke a cigarette?" "Why don't you let Miss Wilkinson rest?" said Mrs. Carey. "You must remember she's not as young as you." "Oh, I'd like to go out, Mrs. Carey," she said rather acidly. "After dinner walk a mile. After supper rest a while," said the vicar. "Your aunt is very nice, but she gets on my nerves sometimes," said Miss Wilkinson as soon as they closed the side door behind them. Philip threw away the cigarette he had just lighted and flung his arms round her. She tried to push him away. "You promised you'd be good, Philip." "You didn't think I was going to keep a promise like that." "Not so near the house, Philip," she said. "Supposing someone should come out suddenly." He led her to the kitchen garden where no one was likely to come, and this time Miss Wilkinson did not think of earwigs. He kissed her passionately. It was one of the things that puzzled him that he did not like her at all in the morning, and only moderately in the afternoon. But at night the touch of her hand thrilled him. He said things that he would never have thought himself capable of saying. He could certainly never have said them in the broad light of day. And he listened to himself with wonder and satisfaction. "How beautifully you make love," she said. That was what he thought himself. "Oh, if I could only say all the things that burn my heart," he murmured passionately. It was splendid. It was the most thrilling game he had ever played, and the wonderful thing was that he felt almost all he said. It was only that he exaggerated a little. He was tremendously interested and exciting in the effect he could see it had on her. It was obviously with an effort that at last she suggested going in. "Oh, don't go yet," he cried. "I must," she muttered. "I'm frightened." He had a sudden intuition what was the right thing to do then. "I can't go in yet. I shall stay here and think. My cheeks are burning. I want the night air. Good night." He held out his hand seriously, and she took it in silence. He thought she stifled a sob. Oh, it was magnificent. When, after a decent interval during which he had been rather bored in the dark garden by himself, he went in, he found that Miss Wilkinson had already gone to bed. After that, things were different between them. The next day and the day after, Philip showed himself an eager lover. He was deliciously flattered to discover that Miss Wilkinson was in love with him. She told him so in English, and she told him so in French. She paid him compliments. No one had ever informed him before that his eyes were charming and that he had a sensual mouth. He had never bothered much about his personal appearance, but now, when occasion presented, he looked at himself in the glass with satisfaction. When he kissed her, it was wonderful to feel the passion that seemed to thrill her soul. He kissed her a good deal, for he found it easier to do that than to say the things he instinctively felt she expected of him. It still made him feel a fool to say he worshipped her. He wished there were someone to whom he could boast a little, and he would willingly have discussed minute points of his conduct. Sometimes she said things that were enigmatic, and he was puzzled. He wished Hayward had been there so that he could ask him what he thought she meant and what he had better do next. He could not make up his mind whether he ought to rush things or let them take their time. There were only 3 weeks more. "I can't bear to think of that," she said. "It breaks my heart. And then perhaps we shall never see one another again." "If you cared for me at all, you wouldn't be so unkind to me," he whispered. "Oh, why can't you be content to let it go on as it is? Men are always the same. They're never satisfied." And when he pressed her, she said, "But don't you see it's impossible? How can we here?" He proposed all sorts of schemes, but she would not have anything to do with them. "I daren't take the risk. It would be too dreadful if your aunt found out." A day or two later he had an idea which seemed brilliant. "Look here, if you had a headache on Sunday evening and offered to stay at home and look after the house, Aunt Louisa would go to church." Generally, Mrs. Carey remained in on Sunday evening in order to allow Mary Ann to go to church, but she would welcome the opportunity of attending evensong. Philip had not found it necessary to impart to his relations the change in his views on Christianity which had occurred in Germany. They could not be expected to understand, and it seemed less trouble to go to church quietly. But he only went in the morning. He regarded this as a graceful concession to the prejudices of society, and his refusal to go a second time as an adequate assertion of free thought. When he made the suggestion, Miss Wilkinson did not speak for a moment, then shook her head. "No, I won't," she said. But on Sunday at tea time she surprised Philip. "I don't think I'll come to church this evening," she said suddenly. "I've really got a dreadful headache." Mrs. Carey, much concerned, insisted on giving her some drops which she was herself in the habit of using. Miss Wilkinson thanked her, and immediately after tea announced that she would go to her room and lie down. "Are you sure there's nothing you want?" asked Mrs. Carey anxiously. "Quite sure, thank you. Because if there isn't, I think I'll go to church. I don't often have the chance of going in the evening." "Oh, yes, do go." "I shall be in," said Philip. "If Miss Wilkinson wants anything, she can always call me." "You'd better leave the drawing-room door open, Philip, so that if Miss Wilkinson rings, you'll hear." "Certainly," said Philip. So, after 6 o'clock, Philip was left alone in the house with Miss Wilkinson. He felt sick with apprehension. He wished with all his heart that he had not suggested the plan. But it was too late now. He must take the opportunity which he had made. What would Miss Wilkinson think of him if he did not? He went into the hall and listened. There was not a sound. He wondered if Miss Wilkinson really had a headache. Perhaps she had forgotten his suggestion. His heart beat painfully. He crept up the stairs as softly as he could, and he stopped with a start when they creaked. He stood outside Miss Wilkinson's room and listened. He put his hand on the knob of the door handle. He waited. It seemed to him that he waited for at least 5 minutes, trying to make up his mind, and his hand trembled. He would willingly have bolted, but he was afraid of the remorse which he knew would seize him. It was like getting on the highest diving board in a swimming bath. It looked nothing from below, but when you got up there and stared down at the water your heart sank, and the only thing that forced you to dive was the shame of coming down meekly by the steps you had climbed up. Philip screwed up his courage. He turned the handle softly and walked in. He seemed to himself to be trembling like a leaf. Miss Wilkinson was standing at the dressing-table with her back to the door, and she turned round quickly when she heard it open. "Oh, it's you. What do you want?" She had taken off her skirt and blouse, and was standing in her petticoat. It was short and only came down to the top of her boots. The upper part of it was black, of some shiny material, and there was a red flounce. She wore a camisole of white calico with short arms. She looked grotesque. Philip's heart sank as he stared at her. She had never seemed so unattractive. But it was too late now. He closed the door behind him and locked it. End of chapter 34. Chapter 35. Philip woke up early next morning. His sleep had been restless, but when he stretched his legs and looked at the sunshine that slid through the Venetian blinds, making patterns on the floor, he sighed with satisfaction. He was delighted with himself. He began to think of Miss Wilkinson. She had asked him to call her Emily, but he knew not why he could not. He had always thought of her as Miss Wilkinson. Since she chid him for so addressing her, he avoided using her name at all. During his childhood he had often heard a sister of Aunt Louisa, the widow of a naval officer, spoken of as Aunt Emily. It made him uncomfortable to call Miss Wilkinson by that name, nor could he think of any that would have suited her better. She had begun as Miss Wilkinson, and it seemed inseparable from his impression of her. He frowned a little. Somehow or other he saw her now at her worst. He could not forget his dismay when she turned round, and he saw her in her camisole and the short petticoat. He remembered the slight roughness of her skin and the sharp, long lines on the side of the neck. His triumph was short-lived. He reckoned out her age again, and he did not see how she could be less than 40. It made the affair ridiculous. She was plain and old. His quick fancy showed her to him, wrinkled, haggard, made up in those frocks which were too showy for her position and too young for her years. He shuddered. He felt suddenly that he never wanted to see her again. He could not bear the thought of kissing her. He was horrified with himself. Was that love? He took as long as he could over dressing in order to put back the moment of seeing her, and when at last he went into the dining room, it was with a sinking heart. Prayers were over, and they were sitting down at breakfast. "Lazy bones," Miss Wilkinson cried gaily. He looked at her and gave a little gasp of relief. She was sitting with her back to the window. She was really quite nice. He wondered why he had thought such things about her. His self-satisfaction returned to him. He was taken aback by the change in her. She told him in a voice thrilling with emotion immediately after breakfast that she loved him. And when a little later they went into the drawing-room for his singing lesson, and she sat down on the music-stool, she put up her face in the middle of a scale and said, "Embrasse, moi." When he bent down she flung her arms round his neck. It was slightly uncomfortable, for she held him in such a position that he felt rather choked. "Je t'aime, je t'aime, je t'aime," she cried, with her extravagantly French accent. Philip wished she would speak English. "I say, I don't know if it's struck you that the gardener's quite likely to pass the window any minute." "Ah, je me fiche du che d'avenir. Je me refiche. Et je me contrefiche." Philip thought it was very like a French novel, and he did not know why it slightly irritated him. At last he said: "Well, I think I'll tootle along to the beach and have a dip." "Oh, you're not going to leave me this morning, of all mornings?" Philip did not quite know why he should not, but it did not matter. "Would you like me to stay?" he smiled. "Oh, you darling, but no, go, go. I want to think of you mastering the salt sea waves, bathing your limbs in the broad ocean." He got his hat and sauntered off. What rot women talk, he thought to himself. But he was pleased and happy and flattered. She was evidently frightfully gone on him. As he limped along the high street of Blackstable, he looked with a tinge of superciliousness at the people he passed. He knew a good many to nod to, and as he gave them a smile of recognition, he thought to himself, if they only knew. He did want someone to know very badly. He thought he would write to Hayward, and in his mind composed a letter. He would talk of the garden and the roses, and the little French governess, like an exotic flower amongst them, scented and perverse. He would say she was French because, well, she had lived in France so long that she almost was, and besides it would be shabby to give the whole thing way too exactly, don't you know? And he would tell Hayward how he had seen her first in her pretty muslin dress, and of the flowers she had given him. He made a delicate idyll of it. The sunshine and the sea gave it passion and magic, and the stars added poetry, and the old vicarage garden was a fit and exquisite setting. There was something Meredithian about it. It was not quite Lucy Feverel and not quite Clara Middleton, but it was inexpressibly charming. Philip's heart beat quickly. He was so delighted with his fancies that he began thinking of them again as soon as he crawled back, dripping and cold, into his bathing machine. He thought of the object of his affections. She had the most adorable little nose and large brown eyes. He would describe her to Hayward. And masses of soft brown hair, the sort of hair it was delicious to bury your face in, and a skin which was like ivory and sunshine, and her cheek was like a red, red rose. How old was she? 18, perhaps? And he called her Musette. Her laughter was like a rippling brook, and her voice was so soft, so low, it was the sweetest music he had ever heard. "What are you thinking about?" Philip stopped suddenly. He was walking slowly home. "I've been waving at you for the last quarter of a mile. You are absent-minded." Miss Wilkinson was standing in front of him, laughing at his surprise. "I thought I'd come and meet you." "That's awfully nice of you," he said. "Did I startle you?" "You did a bit," he admitted. He wrote his letter to Hayward all the same. There were 8 pages of it. The fortnight that remained passed quickly, and though each evening when they went into the garden after supper, Miss Wilkinson remarked that one day more had gone, Philip was in too cheerful spirits to let the thought depress him. One night Miss Wilkinson suggested that it would be delightful if she could exchange her situation in Berlin for one in London. Then they could see one another constantly. Philip said it would be very jolly, but the prospect aroused no enthusiasm in him. He was looking forward to a wonderful life in London, and he preferred not to be hampered. He spoke a little too freely of all he meant to do, and allowed Miss Wilkinson to see that already he was longing to be off. "You wouldn't talk like that if you loved me," she cried. He was taken aback and remained silent. "What a fool I've been," she muttered. To his surprise, he saw that she was crying. He had a tender heart and hated to see anyone miserable. "Oh, I'm awfully sorry. What have I done? Don't cry." "Oh, Philip, don't leave me. You don't know what you mean to me. I have such a wretched life, and you've made me so happy." He kissed her silently. There really was anguish in her tone, and he was frightened. It had never occurred to him that she meant what she said quite seriously. "I'm awfully sorry. You know I'm frightfully fond of you. I wish you would come to London." "You know I can't. Places are almost impossible to get, and I hate English life." Almost unconscious that he was acting a part, Moved by her distress, he pressed her more and more. Her tears vaguely flattered him, and he kissed her with real passion. But a day or two later she made a real scene. There was a tennis party at the vicarage, and two girls came, daughters of a retired major in an Indian regiment who had lately settled in Blackstable. They were very pretty. One was Philip's age and the other was a year or two younger. Being used to the society of young men, they were full of stories of hill stations in India, and at that time the stories of Rudyard Kipling were in every hand. They began to chaff Philip gaily, and he, pleased with the novelty, the young ladies at Blackstable treated the vicar's nephew with a certain seriousness, was gay and jolly. Some devil within him prompted him to start a violent flirtation with them both, and as he was the only young man there, they were quite willing to meet him halfway. It happened that they played tennis quite well, and Philip was tired of pat-ball with Miss Wilkinson. She had only begun to play when she came to Blackstable. So when he arranged the sets after tea, he suggested that Miss Wilkinson should play against the curate's wife, with the curate as her partner, and he would play later with the newcomers. He sat down with the elder Miss O'Connor and said to her in an undertone, "We'll get the duffers out of the way first, and then we'll have a jolly set afterwards." Apparently Miss Wilkinson overheard him, for she threw down her racket and saying she had a headache, went away. It was plain to everyone that she was offended. Philip was annoyed that she should make the fact public. The set was arranged without her, but presently Mrs. Carey called him. "Philip, you've hurt Emily's feelings. She's gone to her room and she's crying." "What about?" "Oh, something about a duffer set. Do go to her and say you didn't mean to be unkind, there's a good boy." "All right." He knocked at Miss Wilkinson's door, but receiving no answer, went in. He found her lying face downwards on her bed, weeping. He touched her on the shoulder. "I say, what on earth's the matter?" "Leave me alone. I never want to speak to you again." "What have I done? I'm awfully sorry if I've hurt your feelings. I didn't mean to. I say, do get up." "Oh, I'm so unhappy. How could you be cruel to me? You know I hate that stupid game. I only play because I want to play with you." She got up and walked towards the dressing table, but after a quick look in the glass, sank into a chair. She made her handkerchief into a ball and dabbed her eyes with it. "I've given you the greatest thing a woman can give a man. Oh, what a fool I was. And you have no gratitude. You must be quite heartless. How could you be so cruel as to torment me by flirting with those vulgar girls? We've only got just over a week. Can't you even give me that?" Philip stood over her rather sulkily. He thought her behaviour childish. He was vexed with her for having shown her ill temper before strangers. "But you know I don't care twopence about either of the O'Connors. Why on earth should you think I do?" Miss Wilkinson put away her handkerchief. Her tears had made marks on her powdered face, and her hair was somewhat disarranged. Her white dress did not suit her very well just then. She looked at Philip with hungry, passionate eyes. "Because you're 20, and so's she," she said hoarsely. "And I'm old." Philip reddened and looked away. The anguish of her tone made him feel strangely uneasy. He wished with all his heart that he had never had anything to do with Miss Wilkinson. "I don't want to make you unhappy," he said awkwardly. "You'd better go down and look after your friends. They'll wonder what has become of you." "All right." He was glad to leave her. The quarrel was quickly followed by a reconciliation, but the few days that remained were sometimes irksome to Philip. He wanted to talk of nothing but the future, and the future invariably reduced Miss Wilkinson to tears. At first her weeping affected him, and feeling himself a beast, he redoubled his protestations of undying passion. But now it irritated him. It would have been all very well if she had been a girl, but it was silly of a grown-up woman to cry so much. She never ceased reminding him that he was under a debt of gratitude to her which he could never repay. He was willing to acknowledge this, since she made a point of it, but he did not really know why he should be any more grateful to her than she to him. He was expected to show his sense of obligation in ways which were rather a nuisance. He had been a good deal used to solitude, and it was a necessity to him sometimes. but Miss Wilkinson looked upon it as an unkindness if he was not always at her beck and call. The Miss O'Connors asked them both to tea, and Philip would have liked to go, but Miss Wilkinson said she only had 5 days more and wanted him entirely to himself. It was flattering, but a bore. Miss Wilkinson told him stories of the exquisite delicacy of Frenchmen when they stood in the same relation to fair ladies as he to Miss Wilkinson. She praised their courtesy, their passion for self-sacrifice, their perfect tact. Miss Wilkinson seemed to want a great deal. Philip listened to her enumeration of the qualities which must be possessed by the perfect lover, and he could not help feeling a certain satisfaction that she lived in Berlin. "You will write to me, won't you? Write to me every day. I want to know everything you're doing. You must keep nothing from me." "I shall be awfully busy," he answered. "I'll write as often as I can." She flung her arms passionately round his neck. He was embarrassed sometimes by the demonstrations of her affection. He would have preferred her to be more passive. It shocked him a little that she should give him so marked a lead. It did not tally altogether with his prepossessions about the modesty of the feminine temperament. At length the day came on which Miss Wilkinson was to go, and she came down to breakfast pale and subdued in a serviceable travelling dress of black and white check. She looked a very competent governess. Philip was silent too, for he did not quite know what to say that would fit the circumstance, and he was terribly afraid that, if he said something flippant, Miss Wilkinson would break down before his uncle and make a scene. They had said their last good-bye to one another in the garden the night before, and Philip was relieved that there was now no opportunity for them to be alone. He remained in the dining-room after breakfast in case Miss Wilkinson should insist on kissing him on the stairs. He did not want Mary Ann, now a woman hard upon middle age with a sharp tongue, to catch them in a compromising position. Mary Ann did not like Miss Wilkinson and called her an old cat. Aunt Louisa was not very well and could not come to the station, but the vicar and Philip saw her off. Just as the train was leaving, she leaned out and kissed Mr. Carey. "I must kiss you too, Philip," she said. "All right," he said, blushing. He stood on the step and she kissed him quickly. The train started, and Miss Wilkinson sank into the corner of her carriage and wept disconsolately. Philip, as he walked back to the vicarage, felt a distinct sensation of relief. "Well, did you see her safely off?" asked Aunt Louisa when they got in. "Yes, she seemed rather weepy. She insisted on kissing me and Philip." "Oh, well, at her age it's not dangerous." Mrs. Carey pointed to the sideboard. "There's a letter for you, Philip. It came by the second post." It was from Hayward, and ran as follows: "My dear boy, I answer your letter at once. I ventured to read it to a great friend of mine, a charming woman whose help and sympathy have been very precious to me, a woman withal with a real feeling for art and literature. And we agreed that it was charming. You wrote from your heart, and you do not know the delightful naivete which is in every line. And because you love, you write like a poet. Ah, dear boy, that is the real thing. I felt the glow of your young passion, and your prose was musical from the sincerity of your emotion. You must be happy. I wish I could have been present unseen in that enchanted garden while you wandered hand in hand like Daphnis and Chloe amid the flowers. I can see you, my Daphnis, with the light of young love in your eyes, tender, enraptured, and ardent, while Chloe in your arms, so young and soft and fresh, vowing she would ne'er consent, consented. Roses and violets and honeysuckle. Oh, my friend, I envy you. It is so good to think that your first love should have been pure poetry. Treasure the moments, for the immortal gods have given you the greatest gift of all, and it will be a sweet, sad memory till your dying day. You will never again enjoy that careless rapture. First love is best love, and she is beautiful, and you are young, and all the world is yours. I felt my pulse go faster when, with your adorable simplicity, you told me that you buried your face in her long hair. I am sure that it is that exquisite chestnut which seems just touched with gold. I would have you sit under a leafy tree side by side, and read together Romeo and Juliet, and then I would have you fall on your knees, and on my behalf Kiss the ground on which her foot has left its imprint. Then tell her it is the homage of a poet to her radiant youth and to your love for her. Yours always, G. Etheridge Hayward. "What damned rot," said Philip when he finished the letter. Miss Wilkinson, oddly enough, had suggested that they should read Romeo and Juliet together, but Philip had firmly declined. Then, as he put the letter in his pocket, he felt a queer little pang of bitterness, because reality seemed so different from the ideal. Chapter 35. Recording by Tom Weiss, Tom'sAudiobooks.com